it interesting. Those who thirst, come to the waters. Thirsty always look for water. But then he tells something also. Those who do not have money, buy, come and eat. Those who do not have money, come, buy and eat. Buy milk and wine. And then, in a stunning way, he affirms something that perhaps is also referred to us. Why do you spend your money to what is not bread? And why do you spend your money to things that do not satisfy you? When we look at the modern world, dear friends, we know that very often how much of money has been spent for the things that really do not satisfy us, or maybe satisfy us momentarily. God always looks at a longer period of satisfaction, and that is why Isaiah provokes the people to think over what they were doing. A reference practically to the situation during that time of Isaiah. People were keen on making money. Sometimes they were trying to take advantage of the poor people. They were devouring the poverty of the land of the poor people. And consequently, Isaiah warns them, why do you spend your money on the things that really do not satisfy you? Now, referring to the modern world, dear friends, we are living in a consumeristic society where there are so many things that are produced. If you look at the television advertisements, the advertisements that come in our papers, newspapers, in mass media, you will find that people advertise saying that this particular thing you need to buy, otherwise you will not be happy. You need to buy this type of car, that kind of home, and that kind of apparatus, or a cell phone, or a computer, or television set. Otherwise, you are not going to be happy. You need to have that, by all means. And then what happens? Sometimes I go through all these multi-million organizations and companies that produce goods. Let us imagine iPhone and Samsung. What a competition between these two multi-million companies that compete with one another, producing the best possible iPhone, the best possible Samsung phone, Android. Now what is the advantage? The advantage is making money. And we can ourselves find out how many types we have bought and how many types we will be buying in future. But more or less the features are same, We are not going to use all those features. But then one thing is very clear. The more you consume, the more you need. That's why, where is the contentment and happiness? According to the Bible, contentment and happiness is just available around us. We don't need to go far away. It is just around us. Look at it in your own life, how you enjoy the company of a friend or few friends at home. When you have a dinner or you organize a lunch, you just go out, sunshine, the beautiful weather, beautiful nature, all given to us gratis. But the only thing is that we need to open our eyes and see how God is providing us everything to be happy and content. Let us come to the second reading. Here St. Paul, letter to the Romans chapter 8, tells that who can separate us from the love of Christ? Who can separate us from the love of God? Now St. Paul, who was a sinner, who was also persecuting the Christians, who met Christ, and that's why he says, nakedness, famine, distress, sword, peril, persecution will not separate us from the love of Christ. And then he also refers, I am convinced that neither the angels or the principalities, nor the height or the depth, nor the present or the future, or any other power for that matter, are not able to separate us from the love of God. Dear friends, when we look at God, God is grace, God is abundance. We Christians very often perhaps think that I need to please God by my devotion, prayers, sacrifices, long prayers or whatever. We are not going to add anything to God. By making long prayers and sacrifices and devotions, we are not making God happier, or when we don't do that, we are not going to make God sadder. Not at all. We cannot add anything to God, or we cannot take away anything out from God. We cannot shrink God. God is abundant, and that is what we have to notice. When we fall in love with God, dear friends, that contentment we experience in the depth of our heart itself is going to be the greatest of the riches. And that's why these mighty people, saints and holy people and mystics, found that precious pearl in their life in order to be happy and content. They found something. That is what last Sunday we referred to, the treasure hidden in the ground. They were happy once they found the treasure. Let us come to the gospel passage. Here Matthew refers to the biggest miracle of the multiplication of bread. Now Jesus, who was very sad because his cousin John the Baptist was beheaded in the prison, and he wanted to go to be alone. So he crosses the lake and goes to the other side of the lake of Galilee, where it was completely a deserted place. He wanted to be alone. Now what happens? People want to know where Jesus is. He was so attractive in his preaching, teaching, and curing the sick. They come in search of him, and they find him. And when Jesus looked at them, he felt compassion for them. And then he started teaching. He did not say, I'm tired, I'm not going to teach you today, leave me alone. He does not say that. He goes to them, he talks to them, and he preaches, teaches, he heals their sick. At the evening, the disciples come and say, now it is evening, please send them to the nearby villages so that they can fetch some food for themselves. And Jesus says, no, you give them food. And one of the disciples, probably who knew how many bread they had, he says, we have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. What can we do with them for all such a big crowd? And Jesus says, ask them to sit. And he blessed the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and they distributed. Dear friends, I just want to interpret this miracle of the multiplication of bread. The first interpretation normally is given, it is the Eucharistic bread. It is a miracle really happened there in the desert. Because from where on earth Jesus could bring bread? That's only a miracle could bring bread to such a big group of people. 5,000 men, excluding men and women. Some experts say it could be 20,000 to 30,000 people. Just imagine the big crowd he had to provide food to all these people. The interpretation is this. When Jesus worked this miracle, we refer back to Matthew's Gospel, chapter 4, verse 4. When devil tempted Jesus in the desert, the devil asked, you are hungry now, make all these stones, transform them into bread. Jesus says, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. So that is a very strong affirmation on the part of Jesus. Every word that comes from the mouth of God. And that's why John chapter 6 verse 51, Jesus says, I am the bread come down from heaven. Unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you will not have life in you. So this is a reference to Eucharistic bread. So when we look at the Eucharistic bread, Eucharistic miracle, dear friends, we do not refer to those miracles that happen here and there about a host bleeding and so on. I am referring to the universal church when Christians break bread and satisfy the hunger of their souls. Just imagine all over the world how many churches, how many priests and how many people participate in the Holy Eucharist. They are satisfied. And then every church for that matter, whether you like it or not, accept it or not, has some program of charitable activity reaching out to the poor and the homeless. You know, this is another part of the Eucharistic miracle, that in some way bread is provided to the faithful to satiate their hunger, their spiritual hunger, as well as food is provided through miraculous ways and means to all those people who are around churches where people come for asking for help. Now the second interpretation, I was trying to find out Why people become obese? People become obese. One of the reasons is this. One of the reasons. When people are sad and depressed, they begin to abuse food. They eat more. They keep on eating more and drinking more, and they become obese. When people are happy and content, they do not abuse. They are very happy with ordinary food. Sometimes I have noticed people eating only salads and sustaining themselves, only fruits and sustaining themselves. But one thing is very clear. When your mind is clear, content, and there is happiness in your heart, you do not abuse food or drinks. Now, what happened in the case of Jesus and those people who were around Jesus? Jesus was speaking about the secrets of God's kingdom. He explained to them the happiness of God's kingdom. The one who found a treasure, one who found a pearl that was precious. And here, people were feeling unburdened of their sufferings and pains, just listening to Jesus. And that is why they did not need much of food. Most probably they were very satisfied with the little they had. So that is the second explanation of the miracle. The third one is very interesting too. Some of the scripture authors and exegetes explain this miracle this way. This may not be the real explanation, but another explanation to the multiplication of bread. When Jesus spoke so powerfully about the Beatitudes, about loving the poor, loving our enemies, and so on, when this boy was having those 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, he blessed and asked the disciples to distribute. What happened? People who were traveling long distances those days, they were always carrying some kind of food along with them, whether it was on camels or donkeys or on their back. Now, when they came to the deserted place, till then Jesus had not worked a miracle of the multiplication of bread. This was the first time Jesus worked a miracle. They never expected that Jesus would provide them food. So how come they could come to the deserted place without any food material with them? Logically is that everyone had something or the other in their bags, sustaining food or bread. And now what happens? When this boy or the apostles or someone who was generous offered 5 loaves and 2 fish, all others thought, we are all making a big family here. We are so familiar, we are listening to a prophet, Messiah, who is going to liberate us, and therefore, now we don't need to keep food for ourselves. We will try to share what we have. And they opened their packets and shared. What a miracle. Everyone had enough of bread, and they collected 12 baskets full of leftovers, indicating that the 12 tribes of Israel will never run short of food or bread. It will be abundantly provided. Therefore, dear friends, when we look at this miracle of the multiplication of bread, we need to ask an ordinary question to ourselves. What kind of contentment and joy I have in my heart that makes me share my joy with others? It's not only sharing things or bread or money. It is sharing the joy I have with those people who are around me, who could be sad. If I can put a smile on their face, in some way I have multiplied the joy of Christ and shared it with others. I conclude this homily with a reference to Michael Kirwan, who was living in the area of Washington, D.C. He died in 1999 due to cancer. But he had a good habit of every day after his work, he would collect some bread, buy some bread, and buy a jar of hot soup, and he would carry it and leave it in a corner of the city and watch. And what the homeless people would do, they would come and help themselves with a bowl of soup and little bit bread. And as he was doing it regularly in that area, one day the same thing happened. He brought some bread and a jar of hot soup and kept it in a corner of the street, and he was waiting for the people to come. A rugged-looking man came and took the whole jar of soup and came near Michael Kirwan and emptied the entire jar on his head, pouring it on him. Now what would you feel? Michael Kirwan felt very sad and bad. He asked, why are you doing this to me? I am trying to help you. And the man answered, we are not dogs, we are not biting you, we are not barking at you, we are human beings like you. And therefore, apart from offering us food, come and talk to us, shake hands with us, and be friendly with us. And from that moment, Michael Kirwan completely changed his idea of serving. And around his home, it is said, there were thousands of people being fed, homeless people. That is what we understand by the miracle of the bread or multiplication of bread. Dear friends, in today's bulletin, I have made a reference to our own church. I remember 5 years ago when I came to Guardian Angels Church, Father Jerry was saying that, whenever the doorbell rings, you have to be very careful, look through the keyhole and find out who is that person. And I asked him, who could be those people? There are a few homeless people, they come for asking bread. And I asked him, how many people come a day? 2 or 3 or 4 or 5? And then I talked to my volunteers and I suggested, why can't we have a bigger program for the homeless and the poor in our own church? And we took a decision and we started announcing to people, and we are collecting first Sunday, the second collection goes to the poor and the homeless. Last year we distributed more than 38,000 sandwiches to the poor and the homeless at our rectory basement door. This is what we feel, dear friends, when we are good, when we are content, when generous, when the word of God really touches us, we should be able to help those people who are less fortunate, homeless and poor. Let us ask the Lord during this Holy Eucharist that He may inspire us to multiply bread, to satisfy the hunger of the people around us, that we may be able to proclaim God's kingdom as Christ did. Kindly rise, we promise. Amen.